Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle Handmade Designs, and in this video we are doing another sew along, but this sew along is part of my new series, the business series. This is the first item sewn in the business series, which is the business jacket, and we will be sewing along to Simplicity 9227 View A, the jacket. Now, before we get started, go ahead and hit the like button and the subscribe button. And also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this sew along. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the next tutorial. This is the first item as part of my business series that it's a new series started this month. And this is the first item that I'm putting into my business series. So the pattern that we are using is Simplicity 9227. I will be sewing along to this jacket right here, View A, and then eventually I will make the pants. Not sure if I would do a tutorial for it simply because it's elastic pants. But if I decide to do a tutorial, I will bring that to you as well. But for this tutorial, we are doing View A, the business jacket. So let's go ahead and get right on into the tools and supplies that you need in order to construct this jacket. All right, so let's talk about the tools and the supplies that you need in order to construct View A, the business jacket, utilizing Simplicity 9227. Of course, you're going to need the pattern. I highly advise you to have the instructions just in case you do not understand something that I say. You could also refer to the instructions, and in this tutorial I will be referring to the instructions as much as possible, just so you have an idea of what it means in the instructions and the glossary as well. I also have my marking tools. I have a pencil just in case I need to size up my pattern or anything of that sort. I highly advise you to measure the pattern pieces to make sure you are cutting the right sides. I also have a disappearing ink marker to mark my dots. I have a white pencil because I am using dark fabric, so therefore I need to mark my dots and anything that I may need to transfer, like a buttonhole, onto my fabric. I also have my clippers. This is for the sewing machine, so I could clip the threads. Also, I have two scissors, one for paper, one for fabric. I never mix the two there. And then I have my rotary cutters, one for paper, one for fabric. I never mix the two there as well. And the only notion that you will need in order to construct this jacket is a button, just one button. The pattern calls for 1 1/4. However, I do not have 1 1/4. This is 1 inch. And because it's already in my stash, this is what I'm going to use. Now that's all the tools and supplies that you need in order to construct this jacket. So let's go ahead and get right on into the pattern instructions now. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the pattern instructions. So of course we're doing View A. So the pattern pieces that you will need will be pattern pieces number 1 through 9. I want to draw your attention to pattern piece number 1, 2, 4, and 5. You will cut with the pattern piece, the right side of the pattern piece facing down, and you'll cut around. I'll talk about that here shortly when I show you the pattern pieces. Also, for View A, depending on what size fabric that you are using, you will follow the guidelines right here for your cutting layout. So they have a cutting layout for you as well. My fabric was 60 inches and I cut a size 14. So this is the layout that I would follow right here if I choose to, okay? Also, make note that the interfacing, you will only need to interface pattern piece number 5, 6, and 7, which is your upper collar, your under collar, your front facing, and your back facing. Also, the seam allowance for your seam allowance would be 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So everything that I say is stitch something together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, okay? Also, drawing your attention to the back, the glossary, if you are not sure with different terminology, you need to read that glossary that talks about stay stitching, reinforcing, which I have many tutorials where I show you how to reinforce in between the dots. Also interfacing, you should know what interfacing is by now, and understitching as well, because you will be doing some understitching in this tutorial. All right, so now that I talked about the pattern pieces, well, more of the pattern pieces and the pattern instruction, let's go right on into the steps that we will take in order to construct this jacket. All right, so still looking at the pattern piece, the pattern instructions. For view A, we will do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And basically there's 20 steps total. So after we built the outside shell of our jacket, we will start at step number 8. And in step number 8, we will go ahead and attach the undercollar in 8 and 9 and 10. And then right at 11, we will start working on the sleeves in 11 and 12. When we get to step number 13, we start working on our facing piece. So we will build out the front facing and the back facing and attach it to the shoulders. And then by the time we get to 16 and 17, we're working on the upper collar, okay? And 18, I'm sorry. At number 19, we will go ahead and understitch the jacket. And then 20, you will go ahead and make your buttonhole and do your button, and then we're all done. So it's 20 steps total, but of course I will walk you through every step of the way. Now that I showed you the instructions to this jacket, let's go ahead and get right on into the pattern pieces that you will need in order to construct this jacket. All right, so let's talk about the pattern pieces you will need in order to construct this jacket. So a lot of the pattern pieces are your basic pattern pieces that you will need in order to construct the jacket. So the first pattern piece is pattern piece number 1, and this is your front. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Now, one thing I will mention is what I did was I made a bust line and then measured the bust line and then remove 1.25 inches after I measured across. So basically what I did, I measured across, multiply that by 2 because I need to cut 2. And then after I did that, I subtracted 1.25, and that gave me what I need from here. Reason being is because you have a side seam where you're going to take off 5/8 of an inch here, 5/8 of an inch here. So that gives you 1.25. But you also need to take an additional 1.25 off simply because you're cutting 2. So you're going to have 2 side seams and 2 front seams that's going to attach to something else. So you need to take that seam allowance off in order to get the bust. You're going to do that for every single pattern piece. So you're going to do that for the front, the back, and the side front to figure out what is your circumference of your jacket. You want to do that for your bust, your waist, and your hips. Reason being is because if you look at the top of your pattern piece, right up here during where the body measurement is, it tells me for size 14 that the waist is a 28, the hips is a 38. Well, neither one of those falls in what I need for my finished garment measurement. So what I had to do was measure the pattern pieces, and it does not come out to what it says on the body measurement, nor does it give you a finished garment measurement for the waist or the hips. So that's something that you have to figure out. So therefore, I wanted to make that very clear in this tutorial of what I did in order to decide what pattern size I need to cut out. All right, so moving on from pattern piece number 1. Another thing I want to mention quickly is I am using a poly cotton poplin navy blue, white, and red uniform plaid. So this is a plaid fabric I am using in poplin. If you are worried about or you wanted to know what type of fabric I am using, because I know I get a lot of questions about what fabric I am using. So I'm going to try to start telling you guys what fabric I am using on each tutorial, okay? So this is pattern piece number 1. The front, you need to cut 2. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 2, which is your side front. And you need to cut 2. Now this pattern piece, you need to have the pattern piece facing down on the fabric, and you will cut around. However, if you're doing what I am doing and you're cutting plaid, you will cut 1 piece of fabric at a time in order for your lines to match up correctly. Now I will do this in a different tutorial on how to cut plaid, okay? So this is pattern piece number 2, your side front, and you need to cut 2. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 3, which is your pocket. You need to cut 4. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 4, which is your back, and you need to cut 1 unfold of fabric. Now this pattern piece is another pattern piece that you're going to place down on your fabric and cut around. Just make sure the right side of your pattern piece is facing down on the fabric, I'm sorry. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 9, which is your sleeve. You need to cut 2. Now these pattern pieces I'm getting ready to show you are all out of interfacing. And the first pattern piece is pattern piece number 5. You need to have the right side of your pattern piece facing down on the fabric and then cut all the way around. You're going to cut 1 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. Next pattern is pattern piece number 6, which is your under collar. You need to cut 2 of fabric and also interface 2. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 7, which is your front facing. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. It's pattern piece number 7, your front facing. You need to cut 2 of fabric and also 2 of interfacing. And the last pattern piece is pattern piece number 8, which is your back facing. You want to cut 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. Now that's all the pattern pieces that you need in order to construct this jacket. So let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing. All right, so go ahead and grab your instructions, and I'm going to pretty much walk you through the first couple of steps. So on step number 1, it wants you to stay stitch the side edge of the front sections from your upper edge to your large dot. Then you're going to clip to your dot. So both of those dots you will basically reinforce and clip to those dots, but not clip through the stitching. On step number 2, it wants you to apply the pockets to both of your side front pieces, which is pattern piece number 2. So you're going to apply the pockets at pattern piece number 2. So pattern piece number 3 to pattern piece number 2, right sides together, and stitch 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And number 3, what you're going to do, so basically you're going to apply 2 pockets to pattern piece number 2 and then 2 pockets to pattern piece number 1. In step number 3, you will be understitching your pockets. All right. And that's understitching your pockets to pattern piece number 1, which is your front. Now I'm going to show you all of this. I'm just walking you through the steps of pattern piece number 1, 2, and 3 so far. Okay. So in step number 4, that's when you will attach your side front to your front. Okay. Step number 5, that's where you will go ahead and clip the top and the bottom of your pocket and then close your pockets and sew it together. Step number 6, that's when we will go ahead and stay stitch the upper edge of your back facing piece and also attach the front to the back. Now I'm going to stop at step number 6, and we're going to do all of these steps now before moving on to step number 7. All right, so go ahead and grab pattern piece number 1. All right, so the first step, if you remember, and that's why I wanted to kind of walk you through the steps first. You remember what it says was to stay stitch from the upper edge, which would be right here, all the way down to that dot, right? So if you don't remember what it says, grab your pattern instruction, and you're gonna stay stitch from this upper edge right here, all the way down to that last dot, which is right here. So go ahead to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stay stitch, and I believe stay stitch is done at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Based off of what, now I have always done stay stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm not sure if it actually tells you in your instructions on where stay stitching needs to be done, but I'm going to say a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Yes, so in the instruction it says stitch garment a 1/2 inch from cut edge in direction of arrows. Now, stay stitching, what you want to do is stay stitch from this edge all the way down to that dot using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You do not need to back stitch at the beginning or at the end in order to stay stitch. So go ahead and do both of your front pattern pieces, stay stitching this side edge now. All right, so now that I have went ahead and stay stitched my side edge right here of my front, now what you want to do is turn it to where you can see it, right? And what you want to do is right at these 2 dots. You have 2 dots right here. I'm hoping you can see this on mine, but there's 2 dots. You do not want to clip through your stitching. You just want to clip to your stitching. So I'm just going to clip to both of those dots. Okay. That's it. Just like this. So you have a little slit in both of those. Now, and make sure you do that to both fronts. Once you do that, move pattern piece number 1 out of the way and grab pattern piece number 2. Now I'm going to do mine for both my fronts. So I'm just going to clip to both of those dots, but not clipping through my stitching, okay? Now, once you do that, move pattern piece number 1 out of the way and grab pattern piece number 2. All right, so with pattern piece number 2, grab pattern piece number 3, your pocket as well. Now, if you remember from the instructions, it wants you to apply the pockets to the side edge of your front and the side front. Now, this is my side front, so what I'm going to do is open up my side front like this. And I'm going to apply my pockets to my side front, and then I'll apply it to my front as well. Now, I'm going to grab the instructions because, like I said, I want to show you guys construction. Now, after doing this, I will not be showing the instructions after we sew the entire shell together. So we are right at step number 2. And the reason why I'm pulling out the instructions is because you need to look at how it's telling you to place things together. So this is the right side of your side front, and with right sides together, you're going to pin the pockets to your side front and do the same thing for your front, okay? So what we're going to do is grab our pocket, pattern piece number 3, and you need to grab 2 for your side front, and then you're going to have 2 for your front. So grab 2 of your pocket pattern pieces, and you should have 2 dots right here. So what you're going to do is match up your dots as well as your notch. So with right sides together, go ahead and pin your pocket to your side front, matching up the notches and the dots now. So I'm going to match up this notch that I have right here and pin. Then I'm going to pin at both of my dots. And then I'm just going to pin all the way down the pocket. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have both of my pockets pinned to my side front, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to backstitch at the beginning and backstitch at the end, and then press your seams toward your pockets. Now, I am going to serge all of my seams for this jacket because I'm not going to be creating a lining for this jacket. So I'm going to serge just where my pocket is, 1 inch above and 1 inch below to encase that pocket and finish it off, and then press my seams towards my pocket. I'm going to do that for my side front, but because I do not like running back and forth to the sewing machine so many times, I'm going to go ahead and pin my pockets to my front as well, and then sew my pockets all together. All right, so grab your pattern piece number 1, and you should have 2 dots right here. So you're going to grab your pocket pieces, and with right sides together, you're going to pin your pockets to the side of your front as well, making sure you match up the notch as well as the dots. So go ahead and pin your pockets in place now. All right, so now that I have the pockets pinned onto both my front as well as my side front, I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and at the end and sew my seams together. Once I do that, I'm going to finish off my seam allowance and press it towards the pocket. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I attach my pockets to my side front and my front, what we're going to do is with right sides together, we're going to attach our side front and pocket to our front and pockets with right sides together. Now, the first thing I want to say is you have a notch right here in your front. You will definitely go ahead and match that up and pin. Let me grab my pins. So you're going to pin there. You're also going to pin where you have this tip right here. You're going to pin that all the way over to that tip where you reinforced, okay? So go ahead and pin there. Now, make sure that you pin the bottom of your side front and front, and then pin the length of your side front and front, but you want to make sure that you leave the 2 dots right here. You probably can't see it on mine, but I can. Leave in between there open in order to stick your hands in your pocket, okay? So go ahead and pin the length of your side front now. All right, so now that I have my side front pinned to my front, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start at the back, the hem, and I'm gonna sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm gonna back stitch at the beginning, come up to this dot, back stitch at the dot, break my threads, come up to this next dot, back stitch, and then sew all the way up and then back stitch at the end. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance also close out my pockets. Once I do all of that, I'm gonna go ahead and serge my edges and then finish off the pockets. Once I do that, I'll come back and show you what it looks like. But make sure that after you finish your pockets, clip the about a good inch, a half an inch above the pocket and below the pocket, and press your seams open. Now I will be doing my seams together instead of open, so I'm just going to clip the side front about a half an inch, and then serge the top, and then do the same thing to the bottom. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have sewn my front to my side front to my front with right sides together, I also finished off my pocket and serged it. I pressed my seams open and pressed the top portion of my seam towards the side front, okay? So now what you're going to do is grab pattern piece number 4, which is your back, and with right sides together, you're going to attach your front to the back at shoulders. Now on step number, I think it was step number 5, so grab your instructions. And I believe at step number 5, it told you to go ahead and attach your back to your front at shoulders and side seams. However, I will not be sewing my side seams at this point. I will sew my side seams when I get ready to insert the sleeves, okay? Now, if you notice, you will see a white line down the center of my back. And the reason for that is simply because I am using plaid. So what I had to do was cut one side and then flip it over and cut the other side to where the plaid match up. So that's why you see a line down the middle of mine. But what I'm going to do is, this is my back with right side up. I'm going to place my front pattern pieces right on top with right sides together. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and attach at the shoulders. So go ahead and match up that notch that you have right here at your shoulder, and you're going to pin, and then pin the top and the bottom all the way across your shoulders on both sides. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the shoulders pinned using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew across both shoulder seams. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have went ahead and attached my shoulder seams with right sides together, I'm gonna show you that. So I attached my front to back at the shoulder seams right here, and then I pressed my seams towards the back. Now I'm gonna turn this over so you could pretty much see it. So this is the back, this is the front, and I attached it at the shoulder seam and pressed my seam towards the back using my seam roll, okay? So this is what it looks like now. Now in the instructions, it tells you to sew your side seam as well. And if you would like to sew your side seams, you can. What I did was I used some Wonder clips, and I clipped it at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and then tried it on to see if it's a good fit. And it fits pretty good for what I'm going for. So it's perfect. Now that I have done that, go ahead and move the jacket out of the way and grab pattern piece number 6, which is your undercollar. All right, now before we do the undercollar, I'm gonna bring the instructions back for just 1 second. And what I am looking at is step number 7 right here. So you should have already applied all of your interfacing to all of your pieces at this point. So it just basically says apply interfacing to undercollar section, and then you're gonna stitch the center back seam. So we're going to go ahead and do that, which is number 7. After number 7, turn to the next page, which is number 8. With right sides together, we're going to attach the undercollar to the jacket where we're matching the notches, the small dots, and then we're going to stitch in between the small dots. Now, I have a different way of doing this. We're going to attach all the way around the jacket, not just the front. I'm going to attach the center back and the front sections that it's referring to. And then it wants you to stitch between the small and large dot, back stitch at the dots to reinforce the seam, and then you're going to clip the back neck of jacket to stay stitching along edge. Now, if you have not stay stitched the back neck edge, go ahead and do so now using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. After we do that, we're going to, in step 9, it wants you to attach the center back seam. Now, I'm going to attach it. If you have seen my blazer jacket where I did the breast cancer awareness jacket and how I did the collar there, it's the exact same way. The only difference is this jacket does not have a dart right there at the collar. So it's going to be the same thing for step 7, 8, and 9. At 10, you're going to trim the neck seam between the small dots at inner corners and then clip the curve and then press the seams open. So we're going to do all of that now. 7, 8, and 9 is what we're working on. So go ahead and move your instructions out of the way. And we're going to start constructing the undercollar like it says in the instructions. So the first thing you want to do is grab pattern piece number 6, which is your undercollar. And with right sides together, now both of your undercollars should be interfaced like it says on the pattern envelope. I'm sorry, the pattern piece, it says to interface to. So you should have both of your pattern pieces interface. And now you have 2 notches right here. I'm going to use my scissors and basically make it to where you could see the notches right here. So you should have 2 notches. And what you're going to do is pin at the notch. So basically you're going to use right sides together. You're going to pin at the notch, pin at the top, and pin at the bottom of your center back seam of your undercollar. And then you're going to go to the sewing machine and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end and press your seams open. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have sewn my undercollar with right sides together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and I press the seams open. So this is what your undercollar is looking like. Make sure you have all your dots marked. Now go ahead and grab your jacket. And what you're going to do is with right sides together, you're going to pin your undercollar to your jacket. Now just remember that my side seams are not sewn together, so do not be alarmed by that. So what you're going to do is looking at your collar, you have it just like this. And what you're going to do is you have 3 notches at the bottom and then you have single notches up at the top. So what you're going to do is you have a dot right there that matches up with this dot. So make sure that you have the center of your jacket facing up, okay? So this is the center of my jacket. I'm looking at the back facing up, and then you're going to match those 2 notches. You have 2 notches right here. You're going to match that to your top portion of your collar. So I'm going to use my scissors and make sure I could see my notches because the interfacing can get in the way. So what you want to do is match up that notch with this notch right here, right sides together, and you're going to pin that notch, right? You're going to pin the other notch as well. All right. Now, you do not see any type of dots on mine simply because I have a darker fabric and I made all my dots on the front portion of my garment. So what I'm going to do is grab my marking tool and make sure that I match it up on the back, okay? So just go ahead and match yours up on the back if you can. So I'm just gonna make a couple of dots there. It's not going through because, like I said, I have really, really dark fabric. So what I want to do is make sure that I am matching up my dots as well. So this first dot that you see right here, hopefully you can see it, that matches up with your shoulder seam. Make sure that your shoulder seam is pressed towards the back of your garment, and then you're going to pin there. Do that on the other side as well. Find that dot and you're going to match it up with your shoulder seams and pin. And making sure that the seam allowance is pressed towards the back of your garment. All right. Now, the other dot, you have a dot right here, that matches up. So basically, this dot matches up to this dot. I hope you can see this. So this dot matches up to that dot, and you're going to pin. Now, the last place that you're going to pin is you have a notch right here. This notch matches up with this notch in the front. So you're going to pin right there. Okay. So now you have this dot and this dot matches up. And the last dot that you have right here will match up to the front of your jacket. So make sure you use enough pins to do this, okay? So make sure you match up that notch as that dot as well. Okay, you're gonna do this to this other side as well. So you should have something that looks like this. Make sure that your fabric is not bunching up underneath. I will definitely fix mine before I sew it to be sure, but you're gonna do the same thing to the other side. Once you do that to the other side and pin, make sure you start at the back. You're gonna back stitch at the beginning. So all the way to this dot that you have over here, you're going to lift your presser foot up, pivot. So to the next dot, lift your presser foot up again and then pivot and sew to this dot. Back stitching at the beginning and at the end. Now make sure you pivot because it will be crucial on how your collar forms. So make sure you are pivoting at those dots. So go to the sewing machine using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and sew your upper collar to your jacket. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the under collar sewn with right sides together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I pressed my seams open. Make sure you have all your dots transferred and you have your notches, you clipped into your notches, okay? Now, go ahead and put your under collar aside for a second, grab your jacket. I wanna make a couple of notes before we attach our under collar to our jacket. So on the front, you have a dot right here. You want to make sure you reinforce that section. So basically at that dot, you're going to go to your left about a good inch and then up an inch because you're going to clip into this section like so, but you do not want to clip your stitching. So I'm just going to clip to it, but not through it, okay? You're going to do the same thing to the other side. I have already stitched this down and across. So now what I'm going to do is take my scissors and clip to the stitching, but not through the stitching, okay? And this is just basically for it to give, all right? When you put on your under collar. All right, so now that I have done that, now with right sides together, you're going to attach your under collar to your jacket. Okay. Now, in the instructions, it wants you to attach the front portion first and then attach the back. However, I'm just going to do it all at once. It'll make it easier for me, okay? So now my fabric is really, really dark, so I cannot see the dots on the opposite side, on the interfacing side. So I'm going to try my best to show you what I'm doing. So this is the center back seam. This is the center back seam where you see the white chalk line. So you're going to match that up, but you also have notches. So go ahead and pin at your notches in the center back. So you have 2 notches. So go ahead and pin at the notch. You also have dots. So you have a dot right here and you have a dot right there. So this dot match up. So go ahead and pin this dot to your shoulder seams. Now make sure that your shoulder seams is pressed towards the back of your garment and just pin there. Now if you need extra pins, go ahead and put extra pins where you need them. You're going to do the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to make sure that this dot match up to my center back seam and make sure that my center back seam, my shoulder seam is pressed towards the back. Not center back, it's the shoulder seam. Make sure that that dot matches up to the shoulder seam and make sure that your shoulder seam is pressed towards the back of your garment. All right, so after you line up the dot to that shoulder seam, you have another dot right here. That dot matches up to the dot where you made that clipping and you're going to pin there. All right, so I'm going to pin there. And then you're going to do the exact same thing to the other side. Now I'm going to stop my pinning there and sew just that portion, not to confuse anybody. I'm just going to sew that back portion and then I'll do the front portion. Now just remind you that this dot right here matches up to that dot where you made that clipping. So make sure you pin there as well. All right, so now that I have my undercollar pinned to my jacket, I'm going to go to the sewing machine, make sure that everything underneath is flat. You have no puckers or anything because this is crucial to how your jacket turns out. Now, what I'm going to do is start in the center back using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning. I'm going to sew all the way to this dot right here, back stitch at the end. I'm going to flip my jacket over starting at the center back and sew all the way to this dot right here and back stitch. That's all I'm going to do right now. Go ahead and do that at the sewing machine now. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my upper collar attached to the back portion, now we're going to go ahead and do the front portion. Okay, so what you're going to do is you have a dot right here and you have a notch. You're going to make sure that this notch match up to this notch on the front and you're going to pin. Okay. And then you're going to make sure that these 2 dots match up and pin. And you're going to make sure that this dot match up with this dot and you're going to pin. Okay. Now you're going to do the same thing to the other side. Make sure that you do not have any puckers or anything underneath. You see how mine have like a little pucker? So what I'm going to do is unpin and make sure that my dots are matching up and I do not have any puckers because it, like I said before, it will make and break your garment. So you don't want puckers underneath. You don't want to be pulling and stretching or anything. So if you need to make any clippings, you can do so. Also, do the same thing to the other side as well. So go ahead and pin the other side as well. So what you're going to do is after you pin the other side, which I will do here shortly, you're going to start at the dot right here, back stitch at the beginning. You're going to start right here at the end, come up to this dot. you're going to lift your presser foot, pivot, and then sew all the way to this dot right here, back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my under collar on, I want to make a correction. So I told you to come out all the way to this dot, but do not come to that last dot. Just stop at the second dot on both sides. So if you went all the way to this last dot, unpick it and then back stitch to this dot right here, which you have that inner corner, and then you have this dot right here. Stop at this dot, not at the end, okay? So I am making that correction now. So the jacket is coming together very good. So go ahead and move your jacket out of the way, and we're going to go ahead and work on our facing piece. If you are following along with the instructions, I am skipping over the sleeves for right now, and I'm going to go to step number 13, which is the front and back facing. So go ahead and grab pattern piece number 7 and 8, and you should know how to do facing pieces by now, but I'll go ahead and walk you through it. So basically, this is pattern piece number 8, your back facing, and then this is pattern piece number 7, your front facing. So go ahead and grab both of those pattern pieces now. And what you're going to do is, with right sides together, you're going to pin the front facing to your back facing at shoulders. So you should have a notch there, and what you're going to do is go ahead and pin at the notch, pin at the top, and pin at the bottom. And you're going to do the same thing for the other side as well. So go ahead and pin the other one as well. Now that I have it pinned together, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew across both shoulder seams. Go ahead and do that now. Now, one thing that I do want to mention before sewing your shoulder seams, make sure that after you sew your shoulder seam, or before, I'm going to do mine before, make sure you stay stitch the back neck edge as well. So go ahead and stay stitch the back neck edge first, and then sew your shoulder seams across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so I attached my facing pieces together. This is my front and this is my back with right sides together, and I attach using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and press my seams open. Now, one thing I want to mention is, if you have not done so, please do this, because it's crucial in how you want your jacket to look, okay? So on the front facing, you do the exact same thing that you did to your front of your jacket. So make sure you come down and across, and then reinforce that dot right here and clip into that dot, just like you did to the front. Do not clip through your stitching, just clip to that dot, okay? Also, if you have not done so, make sure you stay stitch the back neck edge as well. Now that I talked about that, the next thing we're gonna do is finish off our edges right here. We're gonna finish off that bottom portion of our back. So basically, where you do not have any notches is what you're gonna finish off. So you're gonna finish off this edge right here, come around the back, the lower back, and then finish off the other edge of the front, okay? Now, if you want to add a label, please do so now. Now, I'm just gonna put mine in the center. Make sure that your label is at least 5/8 of an inch. I say an inch to give yourself room. Now, because this is a huge back facing, I'm going to place mine in the center. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and place the bottom portion of my label right here. I don't like going to the sewing machine so many times, so I'm just going to do this as I go to my serger and finish off my bottom edge. So I'm going to make sure that my label is pretty straight, right? On this line right here, I'm making sure that it's straight on that line. So when I fold it up, all I have to do is fold in the top a little bit and it will look like this. So I'm gonna place my label right there. I'm gonna go ahead to my serger and finish off the bottom edge of my back facing and the inner edge of my front facing. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my facing piece done, I have my front attached to the back. I also finished off my edges. Now, if you have not done so, because I'm going to do this now on camera, I decided to do this on camera, I'm gonna clip the front pieces like I did for the front of the jacket to my dot, but not through my stitching, okay? So now what you're going to do is grab pattern piece number 5. So I'm going to turn my facing this way to where the back is looking up at me, okay? So grab pattern piece number 5, your upper collar, and you're going to do pretty much the same thing that you did to your under collar, okay? So you have dots, and you know the dots is going to match up with the shoulders, and you're going to attach these two. You're going to stop at these 2 dots right here. So you're going to attach it essentially the same way, okay? So with right sides together, make sure that you pin your notch, those 2 notches like you have in the back of your back facing. So pin there, both of those notches. We will pin the first dot that you have right here at your shoulder seams. So make sure you pin that dot to your shoulder seams and make sure that you do not have any bunching up going on underneath as well. So make sure you do that to both of your shoulder seams. Now, what you can do is go to the sewing machine and do exactly like we did last time and just stitch that portion first and then stitch the other portion to this dot, okay? So what you can do is go to the sewing machine, start at the center back stitch at the beginning, come all the way to this dot right here, and then back stitch at the end. You can go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that you have that back portion stitched all the way to that dot where you have that clipping, you're going to do the exact same thing, match up the double notch that you have right here in the front, and you're going to pin there. And then you have a dot right here. You're going to pin that dot to this dot. Leave that last dot alone, okay? So pin there at that dot. You're going to do the same thing to the other side. So just go ahead and pin those double notches right here. And then pin that dot. So these 2 dots right here, make sure they match up and you're going to pin there. Now, what you're going to do is go to the sewing machine and you're going to start where you left off at this dot, back stitch at the beginning, and all you're going to do is pivot and sew to this dot right here and back stitch at the end. You're going to do the exact same thing to this side as well. You're just going to have it flipped over starting at this dot. You're just going to sew all the way to this dot and back stitch at that dot. Do not sew this portion yet, okay? Once you sew that together, go ahead and trim your seams and press it up toward the upper collar. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my upper collar, let me show you that. I have my upper collar attached to my facings with right sides together. So this is what your facing should look like thus far. So move your facing out of the way, grab your jacket, and what you're going to do is attach right sides together. You're going to attach your upper collar to your under collar. All right, so this is my under collar on the table, right side facing up. And I'm going to take my upper collar, which is the portion that has the facing onto it, and I'm going to lay it right on top of my under collar. Right sides together and make sure everything is matching up and not bunched up. So you have double notch right here. Make sure that that double notch match up with this double notch. And like I said, if you cannot see your double notch, make sure you go ahead and make a snip so you're able to see it. So I'm just gonna make sure that I'm able to see it on mine because the interfacing is kind of making it difficult to see. All right, so I'm just going to pin there at that double notch. You have another one on the other side, so make sure you pin there as well. Now I can see it mine on this side, so I'm just gonna pin. And then you're going to pin, you have this dot meets up with this dot, go ahead and pin there as well. And then you have a dot right here and there. Make sure that these two lines are matching up. We're only worried about the collar portion at this moment. Now I'm just going to pin the remainder of the upper collar to the under collar now. So go ahead and pin now. All right, so now that I have my collar sections pinned together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm gonna start in the back stitch at the beginning, sew all the way down. And when you get to this dot right here, you're going to pivot and stop at this dot. There's a dot right there, so stop at that dot, okay? Do not go any further, stop at that dot. You're gonna flip it over, starting back at the back stitch at the beginning, sew all the way to this dot. When you get to this dot, pivot and then sew to this dot right here, back stitch at that dot, okay? So you just wanna sew on your upper collar to your under collar. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my upper collar attached to my under collar, right sides together, you can go ahead and trim this down, but I will in just a moment. So after you have that, what you're going to do is pin the front sections. From that dot that you just finished sewing, you will pin from that dot all the way along the front portion. So I'm gonna pin at this dot because that's where I'm gonna start sewing from, the dot, and then pin the entire front section all the way to the hem. Do that for both of your front pieces. Just pin all the way down the front, all the way to your hem. All right. Now, what you're going to do is using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to back stitch at the beginning at the dot, pivot about 5/8 of an inch. Basically, you start at the dot, pivot at about 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. When you get towards this corner, come all the way down until you get to the hem. Once you get to the hem, do not try to pivot and close off your hem. Just sew all the way down, back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Go ahead and do that for both of your fronts now. All right, so now that I went ahead and attached my front facing to my coat, this is my front facing. I have my lapel area poked out. I also understitched my upper and under collar. So basically on that portion where you need to understitch, which I think was in step number 18, it wanted you to understitch your upper and lower collar as well as your front facing. So what you need to do there is you need to press your seam allowance down towards the under collar. So when you attach your upper collar to your under collar, press the seams down towards the under collar and then understitch on your under collar, not your upper collar, because you're going to have stitching along your collar area. You need to make sure that you understitch on your under collar area. Also, the understitching on your facing piece, you need to press your seams. I'm going to open it up so you can see. You need to press your seams towards your facing and then understitch as far as possible. So you need to do that and then give it a good press. Now I'm going to give I gave mine a good press, but I'm of course throughout this tutorial, I tend to press my garments a lot. through because I just like mine to have a nice clean polish and look really, really nice on camera and as well as when I wear it, okay? So now that we have done that, the next step you're gonna do is go ahead and do your hem. Now, I have mine's pinned. The hem allowance is 1 1/4, so I'm gonna show you this on camera. So I went ahead and created my 1 1/4 inch hemline, and all I'm going to do is stitch all the way across. After I stitch all the way across, I am going to cut this off. I'm gonna leave about a 1/4 of an inch peak right here at the end, towards the inside, and then just trim all of this off. Go ahead to the sewing machine using 1 1/4 inch. So create your line and stitch along that line. Leave about a 1/4 of an inch peak right here and then cut the rest off. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and stitched my hem in place, what I'm going to do is trim it down. So I'm going to leave about, maybe about 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I guess. And just trim it down. I'm just gonna trim roughly about, leave about 5/8 of an inch. I'm just eyeballing it. Now leave that peak right here on at the end. You're gonna do that to the other side as well. So let me go ahead and do that to the other side as well. And I'm just going to leave a little peak right here and then cut off the rest. Once you do that, you're going to go ahead and turn your facing to the inside, poking out your corners as well. So if you do not have your point turner, grab your point turner so you're able to poke out your corners, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that I poke out my corners. Now be careful that you do not cut any holes in your jacket as well. You just want to softly poke out your corner with your point turner. All right. Now, once you do that, go ahead and give your jacket a nice press. Now you do have this section right here, which you will press up to form your hem after you attach your back and your sleeves, which we will do here shortly. Make sure you do the same thing to the other side as well. Just make sure that you pull your facing to the inside. And if you have not trimmed that little corner right here, make sure you do so. And the reason why I say that is because it will make it so much easier for you to have nice, sharp points at different areas of your jacket, okay? Now that you have done that, give that side a press as well. And the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and construct our sleeve in order to attach the front to the back and enclose our sleeves, okay? So this is what it's looking like. I'm gonna put the jacket up so you can see. So our side seams are not sewn. Our side seam on the back are not sewn to our front yet because I'm gonna do mine when I do my sleeves, okay? And then all of it's going to be sewn in one seam, and then all I would have to do is hem it, okay? So this is what the jacket is looking like so far. Let me show you. And then of course, you're gonna have this portion down as a jacket. So this is what it's looking like. Just make sure you press yours into shape and it'll look fine once you have your sleeves on. But this is what it should resemble thus far, okay? All right, so this is what you should have so far. Of course, you're gonna make your buttonhole at the very end and hem it, okay? So this is what your jacket should be looking like thus far. Go ahead and move your jacket out of the way and grab your sleeve, which is pattern piece number 9. All right, so now that you have your sleeve, I'm gonna tell you exactly what to do. Now I have done it with this sleeve, but I want to show you better than just telling you, okay? So the first thing I did was I went ahead and gathered my sleeve caps in between the notches. So the first stitch is done at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and the second stitch was done at a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance in order to create gathering stitches. Now, gathering stitches is done with the longest stitch on your sewing machine. So just make sure that you are gathering in between those two notches. You have a single notch and a double notch. After I did that, I went ahead and created my hem. I went ahead and pressed it up because it's easier for me that way instead of sewing my sleeve onto my garment and then hem it. Now what I did was I pressed in 1/4 of an inch and then pressed up another inch and then stitched it on the right side of my sleeve, okay? So this is what it looks like on the inside, so that that 1/4 of an inch, I'm sorry, 1/4 of an inch is encased in this seam allowance, okay? So now what you need to do is go ahead, you're gonna do that to the other sleeve as well. Go ahead and grab your jacket. And what you're going to do is attach it. Now you guys know I use the flat method all the time, so this shouldn't be a surprise to you whatsoever. Now, one thing you want to make sure is you match up your notches. So you have a notch right here. This is your side front, so you have a single notch there, and then you should have a double notch on your back, okay? Now, depending on what sleeve you have, now I'm gonna take the sleeve that's already hemmed, and what I'm gonna do is I'm looking for the side that has a notch here and a double notch here. So the way I have it right now is the wrong side or the wrong sleeve. So I'm just gonna turn my jacket to the other side to where I can mirror exactly what my sleeve looks like. So now what I have is I have a single notch over here and a double notch over here. And that's exactly what I need in order to have right sides together and put the sleeve into the arm area, okay? So what I'm gonna do is first pin at the single notch. So I'm gonna pin right here at that single notch. I'm gonna pin at the end. And now I'm going to pin that double notch, this double notch that I have right here. I'm gonna pin that to the back, just like this. And then I'm gonna pin the end of this armhole as well. Now what I'm going to do is adjust my gathers, and by doing that, what I'm essentially doing is easing my sleeve into my armhole area. Now sometimes you may need to gather more or let some of your gathers out. So what I'm gonna do is adjust my gathers to fit into my arm's eye area. So go ahead and adjust your gathers to fit into your arm's eye and pin your sleeve into your arm's eye now. All right, so now that I have my sleeve pinned into my armhole area, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're gonna backstitch at the beginning, so all the way around your sleeve, and then backstitch at the end. Once you do that, go ahead and finish off your seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my sleeve sewn into my arm's eye or armhole area of my jacket, the next thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and attach the front to the back at the side seams, okay? So this is where I tell you that I literally do the flat method for my sleeve so I could be able to sew in one continuous seam. So what I'm going to do is make sure that the seam allowance of my sleeve is up towards my sleeve instead of down towards my jacket. So I'm going to pin at the underarm seams of my sleeves. And then all you have to do is pin at this notch. You have a notch right here, which is your side front. Go ahead and pin at the notch. And then you're going to pin along the length of your sleeve and your side front. Now, make sure that you match up the notch on your sleeve as well, and just pin the entire length of your side back all the way down to your sleeve. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my side seam, which is the side front, pinned front to back, and my underarm seam, my sleeve, the underarm seam of my sleeve pin with right sides together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, I'm gonna start at the hem of my jacket and sew all the way up and through to the sleeves and end at the hem of the sleeve using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so I finished off both of my sleeves. It's looking nice. They are serged and finished off. After I did my sleeves, I went ahead and tacked down the facing, this back facing piece, down along the shoulder seam. So go ahead and do that, and just, you can stitch right on in the ditch to where it's not detectable, you know. Do that on both sides, and I did it over on this side as well. Now, you only have 2 things left to do. The first thing you need to do is your hem. So let me go ahead and show you what you're going to do for your hem. So this is the facing piece. This should already be done. Now what I did was I went ahead and marked up 1 1/4 inch on my hem. Now what you're gonna do is go ahead and fold in 1/4 of an inch. Now I serged mine because I'm not folding mine in 1/4 of an inch and then press up. I could do that. And I may still decide to do that, but I wanted my end serged. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to go ahead and press up 1/4 of an inch and then press up to that line and then encase it. I think that's what I'm going to do instead of leaving this edge raw. Okay. Now, once you do the hem, the only thing left to do is make your buttonhole. Now, how you make your buttonhole in your jacket is you should have transferred this marking on the front pattern piece. And what you're going to do is go to the sewing machine. Now there's already interfacing there. So you're just going to make your buttonhole. After you make your buttonhole, get your seam ripper, cut into that buttonhole, and then mark it on the other side and sew on your button. Once you do that, you are all done with the first item in the business series, which is your business jacket. Now, what I advise you to do is you can either throw it in a washing machine and then give it a really good press, or you could take it to the cleaners and get it really good and press. Now, what I'm gonna do for this jacket is, because it's not a tweed and I could press it into shape really, really good, all I'm going to do is take it upstairs, wash it, and then press it out on my ironing board, all right? And take some photos for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And that's all for this tutorial, which is the business series, the business jacket, which is the first project in the business series. So there you have it. That is the entire sew along for this jacket, the business jacket, utilizing Simplicity 9227. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So I'll catch you in the next video, and as always, keep sewing.